Deathworld by Harry Harrison. Chapter 27. Read by Gerald Frost. The fight was over. It had ended so quickly, the fact had hardly sunk in yet. Rez rubbed his hands against the gleaming metal of the control console, letting the reality of touch convince him. The other men milled about, looking through the various view screens, or soaking in the mechanical strangeness of the room. Jason was physically exhausted, but he couldn't let that show. He opened the pilot's med box and dug through it until he found the stimulants. 3 of the little gold pills washed the fatigue away from his body, and he could think clearly again. "Listen to me," he shouted. "The fight's not over yet. They'll try like anything to take this ship back, and we have to be ready. I want one of the techs to go over these boards until he finds all the lock controls. Make sure all the airlocks and ports are sealed. Send men to check on them if necessary. Turn on all of the external screens and all of the internal screens. I want to scan every direction and every room on the ship. We'll need a guard in the engine room, and my control could be cut off if they broke in there. And they had better do a room-by-room search, in case someone else is locked in here with us." The men had something to do, and now felt relieved. Rez split them up into groups and set them to work. Jason stayed at the controls, his hand next to the pump switch. The battle wasn't over yet. "There's a truck coming," Rez called. "Going slow." "Shall I blast it?" the man at the gun controls asked. "Hold your fire," Jason said, "until we can see who it is. If it's the people I sent for, let them through." As the truck came on slowly, the gunner tracked it with his sights. There was a driver and 3 passengers. Jason waited until he was positive who they were. Those are the ones, he said. "Stop them at the lock. Rez, make sure they come in one at a time. Take their guns as they enter and strip them of all their equipment. There's no way of telling what could be a concealed weapon. Be especially careful of Bruco. He's the thin one with a face like an axe edge. Make sure you strip him clean. He's a specialist in weapons and survival. And bring the driver, too. We don't want him reporting back about the broken airlock or the state of our guns." Waiting was hard. His hand stayed near the pump switch, even though he knew he could never really use it, just as long as the others thought that he would. There were stampings and muttered curses in the corridor. The prisoners were pushed in. Jason had one look at their deadly expressions and clenched his fists before he called to Rez. "Keep them up against the wall and watch them. Bowman, keep your weapons up." He looked at the people who had once been his friends and who now swam in hatred for him. Maida, Kirk, Bruco. The driver was Scott, the man that Kirk had once had appointed to guard him. He looked ready to explode now that the roles had been reversed. "Pay close attention," said Jason, "because your lives depend upon it. Keep your backs to the wall and don't attempt to come any closer to me than you are now. If you do, you'll instantly be shot. If we were alone, any one of you could undoubtedly reach me before I threw the switch. But we're not. You have Pyrrhian reflexes and muscles, but so do the bowmen. Don't gamble, because it wouldn't be a gamble, it would be suicide. I'm telling you this for your own protection, so that we can talk peacefully without one of you losing his temper and suddenly getting shot. There's no way out of this. You are going to be forced to listen to everything I have to say. You cannot escape or kill me. The war is over."
"And we lost, all because of you, you traitor!"
Maida snarled. "Wrong on both counts," Jason said. "I'm not a traitor because I owe my allegiance to all the men on this planet, both inside the perimeter and out. I never pretended differently. As to losing, why, you haven't lost anything. In fact, you've won. You've won your war against the planet if you'll only hear me out." He turned to Rez, who was frowning in angry puzzlement. "Of course, your people have also won, Rez. No more war with the city. You'll get your medicine. You'll get off-planet contact. Everything you wanted." Pardon me for being cynical, Rez said, but you're promising the best of all possible worlds for everyone. That will be a little hard to deliver when our interests are so opposed. You strike to the heart of the matter, Jason said. Thank you. This mess will be settled by seeing that everyone's interests are not opposed. Peace between city and farm, with an end to the useless war you have been fighting. Peace between mankind and the Pyrean life forms, because that particular war is at the bottom of all your troubles. The man is mad, Kirk said. Perhaps, but judge me after you hear me out. I'm going to tell you the history of this planet because that is where both of the troubles and the solutions lie. When the settlers landed on Pyrus 300 years ago, they missed the one important thing about this planet, the factor that makes it different from any other planet in the galaxy. They can't be blamed for the oversight. They had enough on their minds to worry about. The gravity was about the only thing familiar to them. The rest of the environment was a shocking change from the climate-controlled industrial world they had left. Storms, volcanism, floods, earthquakes, it was enough to drive them insane. And I'm sure many of them did just that. The animals and the insect life were a constant annoyance, nothing at all like the few harmless and protected species they had known. I am sure they never realized that the Pyrean life was telepathic as well. There you go again, Bruco snapped. Sure or not, it's of no importance. I was tempted to agree with your theory of psionic-controlled attack on us, but that deadly fiasco you staged proved the theory wrong. I agree, Jason answered. I was completely mistaken when I thought some outside agency directed the attack on the city with psionic control. It was a logical theory at the time, and all the evidence seemed to point in that direction. The expedition to the island was a deadly fiasco. Only, don't forget, that attack was the direct opposite of what I wanted to do. If I had gone into the cave by myself, none of the deaths would have been necessary. I think it would have been discovered that the plants or creatures were nothing more than an advanced life form with unusually strong psi ability. They simply resonated strongly to the psionic attack on the city. I had the idea backwards, thinking they had instigated the battle. We'll never know the truth, though, because they are destroyed. But their deaths did prove one thing. It allowed us to find the culprits, the creatures who are leading, directing, and inspiring this war against the city. Who? Kirk said, breathing the question rather than speaking it. Why, you, of course, Jason told him. Not you alone, but all of your people in this city. Perhaps you don't like the war. However, you are responsible for it and for keeping it going. Jason had to force back a smile as he looked at the dumbfounded expressions. He had to prove his point, and quickly, before even his allies started to think him insane. Here's how it works. I said Pyrean life was telepathic, and I meant all life. Every single insect, plant, and animal. At one time, in this planet's violent history, these psionic mutations proved to be survival types. They existed when other species died, and in the end, I'm sure they cooperated in wiping out the last survivors of the non-psi strains. Cooperation is the key here, because while they still compete against each other under normal conditions, they work together against anything that threatened them as a whole. When a natural upheaval or a tidal wave threatened, they fled away in harmony. You can see a milder form of the same behavior on any planet that is subject to forest fires. But here, mutual survival was carried to an extreme because of the violent conditions. Perhaps some of the life even developed precognition like the human quakemen. With this advanced warning, the larger beasts fled. The smaller ones developed seeds or burrs or eggs that could be carried to safety by the wind or in the animal's fur, thus ensuring racial survival. I know this is true because I watched it happen myself when we were escaping an earthquake. Admitted, all your points, Bruco shouted. But what does it have to do with us? So the animals run away together. What does that have to do with the war? They do more than run away together, Jason told him. They work together against any natural disaster that threatens them all. Someday, I'm sure ecologists will go into raptures over the complex adjustments that occur here in the event of blizzards, floods, fires, and other disasters. There's only one reaction we care about right now, though. That's the one directed towards the people of the city. Don't you realize it yet? They treat you as another natural disaster. We'll never know exactly how it came about, though there is a clue in that diary I found, dating from the first days on the planet. It said that the forest fires seemed to have driven new species towards the settlers. Those weren't new species at all. They were just the old ones with new attitudes. Can't you just imagine how those protected, over-civilized settlers acted when faced with a forest fire? They panicked, of course. If the settlers were in the path of the fire, the animals must have rushed right through the camp, and their reaction would undoubtedly have been to shoot the fleeing creatures down. When they did that, they classified themselves as a natural disaster. Disasters take any form. Bipeds with guns could easily be included in that category. The Pyrean animals attacked, were shot, and the war began. The survivors kept attacking and informed all life what the fight was about. The radioactivity of this planet must cause plenty of mutations, and the favorable survival mutations was now the one that was deadly to humans. I'll hazard a guess that the psi function even instigates mutations. Some of the deadlier types are just too one-sided to have come about naturally in just a brief 300 years. The settlers, of course, fought back. They kept their status as a natural disaster intact. Through the centuries, they improved their killing methods. Not that it did them the slightest good, as you know. You city people, and are their descendants. They're heirs to this heritage of hatred. You fight and are slowly being defeated. How can you possibly win against the biological reserves of an entire planet that can be reactivated each time to meet any new attack? Silence followed Jason's words. Kirk and Maida stood white-faced as the impact of the disclosure sunk in. Bruco mumbled and checked off points on his finger, searching for obvious weak spots in the chain of reasoning. The fourth city Pyrean, Scop, ignored all these foolish words that he couldn't understand or want to understand, and he would have killed Jason in an instant if there had been the slightest chance of success. It was Rez who broke the silence. His quick mind had taken in the factors and sorted them out. "There's one thing wrong," he said. "What about us? We live on the surface of Pyrus without any perimeters or guns. Why aren't we attacked as well? We're human, descendants of the same people as the Junkmen." "You're not attacked," Jason told him, "because you don't identify yourself as a natural disaster. Animals can live on the slopes of a dormant volcano, fighting and dying in natural competition. But they'll flee together when the volcano erupts. That eruption is what makes the mountain a natural disaster. In the case of human beings, it is their thoughts that identify them as a life form or disaster. Mountain or volcano. In the city, everyone radiates suspicion and death. They enjoy killing, thinking about killing, and planning for killing. This is natural selection too, you realize. There are survival traits that work the best in the city. Outside the city, men think differently. If they are threatened individually, they fight, as will any other creature. Under more general survival threats, they cooperate completely within the rules for the universe. Survival that the city people break. "How did it begin? The separation, between the two groups?" Rez asked. "We'll probably never know," Jason said. "I think your people must have originally been farmers or psionic sensitives who were not with the others during some natural disaster. They would, of course, act correctly by Pyrean standards, and survive. This would cause a difference of opinion with the city people who saw killing as the obvious answer. It's clear, whatever the reasons, that the two separate communities were established early and soon separated for the limited amount of barter and that benefited both. "I still can't believe it," Kirk mumbled. "It makes a terrible kind of sense every step of the way, but it's hard to accept. There must be a different explanation." Jason shook his head slowly. "None. This is the only one that works. We've eliminated the other ones, remember? I can't blame you for finding it hard to believe, since it is in direct opposition to everything you've understood to be true in the past. It's like altering a natural law. If I gave you proof that gravity didn't really exist, that it was another force altogether different from the immutable one you know, well, one that you could get around with when you understood how, you'd want more proof than just my words. Probably want to see someone walking on air. Which isn't a bad idea, at that." He turned to Nexa. "Do you hear any animals around the ship now? Not the ones you're used to, but the mutated, violent kind that live only to attack the city." "Planet's crawling with them," Nexa said. "It's just looking for something to kill." "Could you capture one?" Jason asked. "Without getting killed yourself, I mean." Naxos snorted in contempt as he turned to leave. "Beast's not born yet. That'll hurt me." They stood quietly, each one wrapped tightly around his own thoughts, while they waited for Naxa to return. Jason had nothing more to say. He would do one more thing to try and convince them of the facts. After Naxa returned, that would be up to them to reach a conclusion. The talker returned quickly, with a stingwing tied by one leg to a length of tether. It flapped and shrieked as he carried it in. "In the middle of the room, away from everybody," Jason told him. "Can you get the beast to sit on your something that won't flap around?" "My hand good enough?" he asked, flipping the creature so that it came to the back of his gauntlet. "That's how I caught it." "Does anyone doubt that this is a real stingwing?" Jason asked. "I want to make sure that you all believe there's no trickery here." "That's the real thing," Bruco said. "I can smell the poison on the wing claws from here." He pointed to the dark marks on the leather where the liquid had dripped. "If that eats through the gloves, he's a dead man." "Then we agree it is real," Jason said. "Real and deadly. The only thing to test the theory will be if you people from the city can approach it like Naxa here." They drew back automatically when he said this, because they knew that stingwing was synonymous with death. Past, present, and future. You don't change a natural law. Maida spoke for them all. "We can't. This man lives in the jungle, like an animal himself. Somehow he's learned to get near them, but you can't expect us to do that." Jason spoke quickly, before the talker could react to the insult. "Of course I expect you to. That's the whole point. If you don't hate the beast and expect it to attack you, then it won't. Think of it as a creature from a different planet, something harmless." "I can't. It's a stingwing." As they talked, Bruco stepped forward, eyes fixed steadily on the creature perched on the glove. Jason signaled the bowmen to hold their fire. Bruco stopped a safe distance and kept looking steadily at the stingwing. It rustled its leathery wings uneasily and hissed. A drop of poison formed at the tip of each great poison claw on its wings. The control room was filled with deadly silence. Slowly, he raised his hand, carefully putting it out over the animal. Then the hand dipped a little, rubbed the stingwing's head once, and fell back to his side. The animal did nothing except stir slightly under the touch. There was a concerted sigh, and those who had been unknowingly holding their breath breathed again. "How did you do it?" Maida asked. What?" Bruco asked, apparently snapping out of a daze. Oh, touching the thing? Simple, really. I just pretended it was one of the training aids I use, a realistic but harmless duplicate. I kept my mind on that single thought, and it worked. He looked down at his hand, then back at the stingwing. His voice grew quieter now, as if he spoke from a distance. It's not a training device, you know. It's real. Deadly. The off-worlder is right. I guess he's right about everything. With Bruco's success as an example, Kirk came closer to the animal. He walked stiffly, as if on the way to his own execution. Runnels of sweat poured down his rigid face, but he believed and kept his thoughts directed away from the stingwing, and he could touch it unharmed. Maida tried, but she couldn't fight down the horror it raised when she came close.
I am trying, she said, and I do believe you. I just can't do it.
Scott screamed when they all looked at him. He shouted it was a trick and had to be clubbed unconscious when he tried to attack the bowman. Understanding had come to Pyrrhus. Chapter 28.
What do we do now?
Maida asked. Her voice was troubled, questioning. She voiced the thoughts of all the Pyreans in the room, and, for that matter, the thousands who watched on the screen. What will we do? They turned to Jason, waiting for the answer. For the moment, their differences were forgotten. The people from the city were staring expectantly at him, as were the crossbowmen with half-lowered weapons. This stranger had confused and changed the old world they were used to, and had presented them with a newer and stranger one, with alien problems. Hold on, he said, raising a hand. I'm no doctor of social ills. I'm not going to try and cure this planet full of muscle-bound sharpshooters. I've just squeezed through by, up to now, the law of averages. I should be dead 10 times.
Even if everything you say is true, Jason, Maida asked, you still are the only one who can help us. What will the future be like?
Suddenly weary, Jason slumped into the pilot's chair. He glanced around at the circle of people. They seemed sincere. None of them even appeared to have noticed that he no longer had his hand on the pump switch. For the moment, at least, the war between city and farm was forgotten. I'll give you my conclusions, Jason said, twisting in the chair, trying to find a comfortable position for his aching bones. I've been doing a lot of thinking for the last day or two, searching for the answer, and the very first thing I realized was that the perfect and logical solution wouldn't do it all. I'm afraid the old ideal about the lion lying down with the lamb doesn't work out in practice. About all it does is make a fast lunch for the lion. Ideally, now that you know the real causes of your trouble, you should tear down the perimeter and have the city and the forest people mingle in brotherly love. Makes just as pretty a picture as the lion and the lamb, and would undoubtedly have the same results. Someone would remember how really filthy grubbers are, or how stupid junkmen can be, and there would be a fresh, cooling corpse, and the fight would spread, and the victors would be eaten by the wildlife that swarmed over the undefended perimeter. No, the answer isn't that easy. As the Pyreans listened to them, they realized where they were and who they were, and glanced around uneasily. The guards raised their crossbows again, and the prisoners stepped back to the wall and looked surly. See what I mean? Jason asked. Didn't take long, did it? They all looked a little bit sheepish at their unthinking reaction. If we're going to find a decent path for the future, we'll have to take inertia into consideration. Mental inertia, for one. Just because you know a thing to be true in theory doesn't make it true in fact. The barbaric religions of our primitive worlds had not a single germ of scientific fact, though they claimed to explain all. Yet, if one of those savages had all of his logical ground for his beliefs swept away, he didn't stop believing. He then calls his mistaken beliefs faith, because he knows they are right, and he knows they are right because he has faith. This is an unbreakable circle of false logic that can't be touched. In reality, it's plain mental inertia, a case of thinking what always was will also always be, and not wanting to blast that thinking patterns out of their old ruts. Mental inertia is not going to cause all the trouble. There's also cultural inertia. Some of you in this room believe my conclusions and would like to change. But will all of your people want to change? The unthinking ones, the habit-ridden, reflex-formed people who know what is now will always be. They'll act like a drag on whatever plans you make, whatever attempts you undertake to progress with the new knowledge that you have. Then it's useless? There's no hope for our world? Rez asked. I didn't say that, Jason answered. I merely mean that your troubles won't end by throwing some kind of a magic mental switch. I see 3 courses open for the future, and chances are that all 3 will be going on at the same time. First, and best, will be the rejoining of the city and the farm Pyreans into a single human group that they came from. Each is now incomplete and has something that the other needs. In the city here, you have science and contact with the rest of the galaxy. You also have a deadly war. Out there in the jungle, your first cousins live at peace with the world, but lack medicines and the other benefits of scientific knowledge, as well as any kind of cultural contact with the rest of mankind. You'll both have to join together and benefit from the exchange. At the same time, you'll have to forget the superstitious hatred of each other. This will only be done outside the city, away from the war. Every one of you who is capable should go out voluntarily, bringing some fraction of the knowledge that needs sharing. You won't be harmed if you go in good faith, and you will learn to live with this planet rather than against it. Eventually, you will have civilized communities that won't be either rubber or junkmen. They'll just be Pyrians. What about our city here? Kirk asked. It'll stay right here. It probably won't change in the slightest. In the beginning, you'll need the perimeter and the defenses just to stay alive, while people are leaving, and after that, it will keep going because there are going to be any number of people here who you won't convince. They'll stay and fight and eventually die. Perhaps you will be able to do a better job educating their children. What the eventual end of the city will be, I have no idea. They were silent as they thought about the future. On the floor, Scott groaned, but did not move. Those are 2 ways, Maida said. What's the third? The third possibility is my own pet scheme, Jason smiled. And I hope I can find enough people to go along with me. I'm going to take my money and spend it all on outfitting the best and most modern spacer with every weapon and piece of scientific equipment I can get my hands on. Then I'm going to ask for Pyrean volunteers to go with me. What in the world for? Maida frowned. Not for charity. I expect to make back my investment and more. You see, after these past few months, I can't possibly return to my old occupation. Not only do I have enough money now to make it a complete waste of time, but I think it would be also an unending bore. One thing about Pyrus, if you live, is that it spoils you for the quieter places. So I'll take this ship that I mentioned and go into the business of opening up new worlds. There are thousands of planets where men would like to settle, only getting a foothold on them is too rough, too rugged for the usual settlers. Can you imagine a planet that a Pyrean couldn't lick after the training you've had here and enjoy it? There would be more than pleasure involved, though. In the city, your lives have been geared for continual deadly warfare. Now you're faced with the choice of a fairly peaceful future or staying in the city to fight an unnecessary and foolish war. I offer the third alternative of occupation you know best, and that would let you accomplish something constructive at the same time. Those are the choices I see. Whatever you decide is up to you personally." Before anyone could answer, livid pain encircled Jason's throat. Scott had regained consciousness, and he had surged up from the floor. He pushed Jason from the chair and, with a single motion, held on to him by the neck, throttling him. "Kirk, Maida!" he shouted hoarsely. "Grab guns! Open the locks! Our people will be here! Kill the grubbers! Kill their lies!" Jason tore at the fingers that were choking the life out of him, but it was like pulling at bent steel bars. He couldn't talk, and the blood hammered in his ears. Maida hurtled forward like an uncoiling spring, and the crossbows twanged. One bolt caught her in the leg, and the other transfixed her upper arm. But she had been shot as she jumped, and her inertia carried her across the room to her fellow Pyrean and the dying offworlder. She raised her good arm and chopped down with the edge of her hand. It caught Scott a hard blow on the bicep, and his arm jumped spasmodically, his hand leaping from Jason's throat. "What are you doing?" he shouted, in strange terror, to the wounded girl who fell against him. He pushed her away, clutching Jason with his other hand. She didn't answer. Instead, she chopped again, hard and true, with the edge of her hand, catching Scott across the windpipe, crushing it. He dropped Jason and fell to the floor, retching and gasping. Jason watched the end through a haze, barely conscious. Scott struggled to his feet, turned pain-filled eyes to his friend. "You're wrong," Kirk said. "Don't do it." The sound of the wounded man was more animal than human. He dived towards the guns on the far side of the room, and the crossbows twanged like harps of death. When Bruco went over to help Maida, no one interfered. Jason gasped air back into his lungs, breathing in life. The watching glass eyes of the viewer carried the scene to everyone in the city. "Thanks, Maida, for understanding and helping." Jace had to force the words out. "Scott was wrong, and you were right," she said. Her voice broke for a second. Bruco snapped off the feathered end of the steel bolt with his fingers and pulled the shaft out of her arm. "I can't stay in the city. Only people who feel as Scott would be able to do that. I'm afraid I can't go into the forest. You saw the luck I had with the stingwing. If it's all right, I'd like to come with you. I'd like that very much." It hurt when Jason talked, so he could only smile. But she knew what he meant. Kirk looked down in unhappiness at the body of the dead man. "He was wrong, but I know how he felt. I can't leave the city, not yet. Someone will have to keep things in hand while the changes are taking place. Your ship is a good idea, Jason. You'll have no shortage of volunteers, though I doubt if you'll get Bruco to go with you." "Of course not," Bruco snapped, not looking up from the compression bandage he was tying. "There's enough to do right here on Pyrus. The animal life, quite a study be made, and probably even every ecologist in the galaxy is going to come here. They'll need help." Kirk walked slowly over to the display screen that showed the city. No one attempted to stop him. He looked out at the buildings, the smoke still curling up from the perimeter, and the limitless sweep of green jungle beyond. "You've changed it all, Jason," he said. "We can't see it now, but Pyrus will never be the way it was before, for better or for worse." "Better," Jason croaked and rubbed his aching throat. "Now, get together and end this war so people will really believe it." Rez turned after an instant's hesitation, extended his hand to Kirk. The gray-haired Prairian felt the same repugnance himself about touching a grubber. They shook hands then, because they were both strong men. The end.